Hello and welcome to All Things Foster, a place for coffee, connection, and community. The episode title for today is Healing Through Relationships, Dr. Erin Hambrick on childhood trauma and resilience. Before we get to that, our episode sponsor this week is Blueprint Fitness Lab. We provide personalized nutrition coaching for those who are ready, willing, and able to reach their health and fitness goals. We cut out the noise and help you find what works for your body and your life so you can thrive in every season. The holidays are coming, and now is the time when we typically say, I'll get in shape in the next year. But the holidays come every year, so why not learn how to navigate them successfully, enjoy the celebrations, and start the new year without the typical 5 to 7 pound holiday weight gain? Head to blueprintfitnesslab.com to learn more and schedule a free call to see how we can help you reach your goals. And I'll tell you, as I say this just about every week, Bree and her husband Daniel are great folks. And so if you're interested in getting in a little bit of shape, maybe getting some coaching done, definitely reach out to them. So again, thank you for tuning in to All Things Foster. I'm Matt Derry, your host, Executive Director of Panhandle Orphan Care Network. And I want to reintroduce to those of you who slogged through our 5-part series on trauma. We have Hannah Doggett back with us again. We talked a lot about Dr. Hambrick's work, the work that Hannah had done kind of under Dr. Hambrick. And so I wanted really to kind of have an opportunity to meet with Dr. Hambrick as well. And so Hannah, thank you so much for coming back. And Dr. Hambrick, thank you so much for coming on today. I'm really, the issues of trauma and trying to help folks understand trauma and overcome trauma is really, really important to me. So before we kind of dig in, give us a little bit on you and what you do.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. And Hannah is my first research student ever. Thanks for thinking of me for this podcast and carrying on the great work that we started together many years ago at this point. Kind of hard to believe. So yes, I'm Dr. Erin Hambrick, work with children mostly. So I go by Dr. Erin a lot. And my background is I'm a clinical child psychologist by training. And I've always specialized in children and families who have been affected by trauma. I'm particularly interested in how early life trauma really affects the developing child and family dynamics, and especially what we can do to help. And relationally oriented resources and interventions are really important to me in this work.
Absolutely. And so you you work some at UMKC, and then you also do some independent stuff as well as with the Children's Place, which is what?
Yes. Yeah. So I, for the first 8 or 9 years of my career, I was a professor at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, with a research lab focused on child trauma. And, kind of following the COVID pandemic and just changes in my own family, I was looking for new ways to re-engage kind of the same material. And so I decided to go out on my own as an independent consultant.
Right.
I still work some with the University of Missouri, Kansas City, helping students learn how to work with infants and young children, particularly those who've experienced trauma. And I spend a lot of time at the Children's Place here in Kansas City as a clinical and evaluation consultant. And so help them think through treatment goals, intervention goals for specific children and families, help them lead relationally oriented intervention groups, but also help them think through how to tell the story of what works for very young kids who have complex needs. Many of the children that we intersect with, by the time they enter our services at the average age of 3, they've experienced 6 to 8 different types of trauma already.
Wow.
And we also know that something that kind of goes hand in hand with trauma exposure is kind of a low history of relational health Kids who are trauma exposed also tend to have very little access to those safe, stable, nurturing relationships. And so it's just a very important age group to me, especially because I think when we think about trauma, we don't often think about how at risk very young children are for experiencing the effects of trauma.
Right.
And so, I'm just excited to still be in this same vein of work, even though I've shifted venues a bit.
Yeah, see, Hannah and I talked about how, they say, well, they're just little bitty. They don't remember it, right? So it doesn't really, it's not really there. It doesn't really matter. And it's just not the case, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely not the case at all. I mean, it's very true that a 4-year-old can't tell you in their own words what happened to them when they were 0, 1, maybe even 2 years of age. They can't tell you a story about what happened to them.
Yeah.
But the impact comes in, and I'm sure you all have discussed this some already, the very systems that help us stay alive, regulate our heart rate, understand if we're safe, understand if relationships are safe, are developing more rapidly when we're very young than they ever will again.
Right.
And so if those developmental systems get told at a super young age, the world isn't safe, it's chaotic, it's unpredictable, you never know when you'll hear a loud noise, you have no power over whether or not you'll get your basic needs met for toileting, eating, sleeping, soothing. That just teaches the young system to either completely be on guard or to just completely disengage from the world, right? Because engagement with the world didn't help them. It didn't meet their needs. And so, it's easy, to think, well, they can't tell the story of what happened, but their bodies know exactly what happened. And it really sets the stage for how they interact with the world.
Right. We were, this is on my TBR list, but, and Hannah and I talked about it some on our recordings, but the book, The Body Keeps Score, right? That we were on vacation and I saw it and I grabbed it, and of course then my wife decided she was going to read it first, and so I'm
get 2 copies,
right. Yeah. So first, Dr. Hambrick, what made you go into this field? Was it just you were early in college and you were like, man, that sounds interesting? Or was it something, why this field?
Yeah. It was, I can remember so clearly a lot of the steps that took me on this journey. I went to a liberal arts college. And so the emphasis early on wasn't on, you got to pick a career or a major immediately, right? It was kind of that academic exploration. And I loved all of my classes. I loved learning. I describe myself as a lifelong learner still. And I just kept thinking, I feel like I have things to say about the world, right? Like I just have things to say. I care about things and I want people to hear about the things that I care about. And so I knew that much. And then I was sitting with a friend my sophomore year of college who just started describing the psychology classes that she was taking. And I thought, I'm so completely interested in that, right? And so I immediately enrolled in a psych class, loved it, couldn't get enough of the information. But then when it came time to go to grad school, I had been so focused on just the learning itself that I hadn't really been focused on thinking about, like, how do I get into a good grad school, right? Like, how do I make this launch? And so I thought, I'm going to take a gap year. And I took a gap year working with kids who had autism, working as an administrative assistant in a therapy office. And I thought, I just love this field, but I don't know nearly enough to solve the problems I want to solve. And so I went and got a master's degree at Western Carolina University. Love that place, learned so much there. And their goal was to get students into doctoral programs. And I thought, I have so much to learn. I'm probably going to want to stay in school for the next 10 years and knew that about myself early on somehow. And that was when I became so curious about resilience. Why is it, how is it that people can go through terrible things and come out fine, come out with growth, but also come out facing significant challenge, right?
Yeah.
Like how is it that all of that is so possible? And it was at that point in my education where I actually read Dr. Perry's book, The Boy Who's Raised as a Dog.
Mm.
And it just hit me that besides the trauma and resilience stuff, I was very interested in how it is that life experience can literally get under our skin, affect our neurobiology
Yeah.
in a way that can lead to very enduring outcomes. Again, either positive or negative.
Right. Right. And then, yeah, because so much of how we experience the world, it we Hannah and I did an episode that, the reversibility of trauma, right? You can overcome it, but so much of kind of who we are happens either in utero, and then within that first, you know, year to 2 years, right?
Absolutely.
When baby cries and needs are met, or when baby cries and needs aren't met, right? That begins that process. And man, it can just have lifelong impacts.
Yeah. I mean, I like to say it kind of shapes the life template. It shapes our expectations for what
Mm,
life will be like. And the more we have later experiences that confirm those expectations, I mean, wow, the deeper our body digs in and says, yep, this is the kind of world I'm living in. I got to
mm,
look out for myself
right.
any way that I can.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, to your point, it's not um, over. It's not like there isn't hope
Yeah.
after those early years, right? Because the more that we have experiences that disconfirm that early learning, it
Mm,
takes more disconfirmatory than confirmatory
right. Sure.
experiences to
Yeah.
change us. The change is still possible, but the magic is really in the work that we need to do. The work has to be very grounded in an understanding of what the experiences in those early years have done.
Mm. So I know this is kind of off topic, but kind of on. So my wife and I love Special Victims Unit, right? And so we're like
Uh-huh.
rewatching the whole series, and like way back in the early few seasons, they were still in the DSM-4, and Dr. Wong is like, can't even remember the case, but it was like, once they're set, it's like some case about some 15-year-olds, like once they're set, and there's no changing it. And we've learned a lot since then, right? I mean,
Yeah.
is it hard to change? Sure, but
Yeah.
it is possible. Change is possible.
It is possible, and it's easiest the earlier we get started,
Right.
right? Like starting early is always going to be best, but also the current context that we find ourselves in can really override early experiences. Even if our early experiences weren't great, if we can get our current context to constantly send us messages that we're connected, we're
Mm,
supported, we have resources, we're loved, that might even be the biggest indicator of how well a person is doing above
yeah.
and beyond even how early we can get started.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
So, what is the key mentors? Did you? I know you said you read Dr. Perry's book. Did you work with Dr. Perry?
Yes, I had the privilege of working with Dr. Perry for, I don't know, 10 or 12 years.
Wow.
Still intersect with him plenty now as his nonprofit is kind of shifted to a for profit. So some of the research work that I was doing with his group wasn't as great of a fit for that nonprofit manifestation that they have right now. But I think one of the things that Dr. Perry really taught me and that was so engaging to me about his work was just his ability to respect the complexity of human experience
Mm,
and the uniqueness of every person, and how really the very specific elements of a person's life history are really going to give us the clues we need in terms of how we want to relate to them and interact to them and to respond to them.
Mm.
And, importantly, we can't just go around being curious and asking kids to tell us all about their trauma histories, right? So that we can learn all those cues. The key is we have to get to know kids and their caregivers, so that they feel comfortable with us and so that they want us to know their
Right.
story, so
Yeah.
that they trust us to know their story and then to do something with it.
Yeah.
Because the story is no good to anybody if we're not focused on, well, now what do we do? And so I think his ability to just say over and over again, this is complex, this is hard work, this is long-term work. This type of work doesn't fit within our, a paradigm, emerging paradigm in the psychological sciences of short-term evidence-based interventions all the time. We have to be willing to look at the long term here. But if we do, we can prevent very expensive, very troubling, very hard to manage outcomes like likelihood that somebody might go to jail, right? Likelihood that somebody might be unemployed for much of their life. So I just really appreciated learning that lesson from him because I think it still shapes the work that I do.
That's cool. So what does your current work look like? What are you seeing is common in the work of trying to help families kind of overcome these early traumas?
Yeah, I mean, I think one really big challenge is that when kids have experienced trauma, it's also likely that the people who are trying to care for them have also experienced trauma,
Right.
also have very little access to the resources that could be useful to them and helping them get on their feet. And healing trauma really requires present and attuned caregiving. And I don't care how well intentioned you are, how good of a person you are. If you're having to work 6 jobs to put food on the table, if you're having to care for not only your own kids, but maybe now you're 45, 50 years old and you're caring for some of your grandkids as well, right?
Yeah.
You got a lot of kids under your roof. Though all of those things deplete those very relational resources that kids need so deeply. And so I think one of the biggest challenges is how do we scale up what kids who've experienced trauma need using people who feel safe to them, their community members, their own family members, in a way that doesn't further make families think the hill is too big for me to climb, right? Because this type of work really also takes a lot of hope.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, would you say that relationship is probably the single most important piece of healing or
Yeah, and I mean,
vulnerable?
I would definitely say that, and I think we see that even when trauma isn't part of the picture. You go through the past 50 years of intervention research, and so much of the research says it's mostly these what we would call common factors that lead to change. And one of those common factors is always like the rapport or the strength of the relationship between the therapist and whoever they're working with, child, adult. I think that is really magnified for kids who have experienced trauma because, experiencing trauma, a form of trauma can be neglect, right?
Right.
Like actual unavailability emotionally to meet the child's emotional needs, to meet the child's physical needs. So some things just get missed. But then, if the child has additionally had other forms of trauma, like they've experienced physical abuse, maybe they've witnessed physical abuse, they've had, other sorts of sexual traumas, maybe. They also spend a lot of their time being what I would call very either hyper vigilant
Right.
or kind of hypovigilant. Hypervigilant meaning I'm looking around my environment all the time for signs of stress.
Yeah.
And therefore, I'm not paying attention to how nice you are. I'm not paying attention to these concepts you're trying to teach me. Those aren't relevant to whether or not I'm staying alive,
Yeah.
right? Or they can become kind of hypovigilant where they say, you know what, the only safe place is like inside my body away from this external
Right.
world. So
Yeah.
I'm going to go inside my shell and
Mm.
protect myself
Yeah.
and rely on my own kind of internal opioid system to regulate me. And both of those things make it harder to even benefit from the relationships that are around us.
Mm.
And so when it comes to working with children who have experienced trauma at a very young age, we have to understand there's been a double whammy in terms of their ability to get very basic relational needs met. And if we don't start there by making them feel safe, then we really don't have an opportunity to engage them in any other learning, right? Like teaching them a coping skill, they're not even hearing you, right? They might
Right.
smile and nod and, oh, say, oh, good idea, right? But they're not with you unless
Mm.
they feel safe with you.
So that, yeah, and then and that, whether that's in a therapist's office or in a foster and adoptive home or
Right.
whatever, they're, if they don't feel safe and seen and connected to you.
Yeah, they're not benefiting from the other things, that you're trying to do. And something that came into my mind when you said that is children find themselves in lots of different contexts, right? And so we as therapists want to do all we can when we're with them. But actually, 1 hour of therapy is really not going to make all that much change in a child's life, right? Sure,
Mhm.
it's great that one person cared about them and was
Right.
consistent and all
Yeah.
that. But really, when it comes to helping kids with early life trauma, I mean, we have to think about how do we embed therapeutic opportunities for them throughout every single place they're going to go,
Yeah.
the home setting, the school setting, the community setting, spiritual settings, sports and club settings, all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it starts with the relationship. So you talk about the timing, the nature, and the diversity of adversity. What do you what do you what do you see there? What are we looking at here?
Yeah. Well, Hannah probably knows this. I talked about how something Dr. Perry taught me was that everything's complex and all people are unique. And no two trauma exposed children are alike,
No.
and no two trauma exposed children have experienced the same trauma. And I think it's been easy historically for our field to say, well, we want to measure something well. So let's just see if the type of trauma that a child experienced matters, right? Is sexual abuse worse than physical abuse? Is domestic violence worse than neglect? There was a lot of research that kind of looked at that, but all the research was kind of confusing. One article would say sexual abuse was worse, and another would say physical abuse is worse. And we started saying, what's going on here, right?
Mhm.
And then people started to say, well, maybe it's the number of traumas that you've experienced that really matters. And there's
Mm.
a lot of compelling research to show that, yeah, I mean, the more traumas you experience, the more likely you are to have lifelong, not only mental health challenges, but physical health challenges,
Right.
right? Like if our adrenaline's pumping all the time, right? Our heart's working harder, we're not processing our glucose right, we're at risk for diabetes, blood pressure issues, all sorts of health problems as
Mhm. Yeah.
well. And there's been a lot of great work that's come out of that. But then people started to think, well, but what if this person had 5 traumas, but they were kind of minor? You hate to call any trauma minor,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about all bad things here. But some people said, I've noticed that kids who have really severe traumas are the ones doing the worst, right? This neglect happened for 2 years, right?
Yeah.
Or the neglect was, so extreme that the child didn't have any visual input, right, during their early years of life. And people were saying, well, that really matters. And the kind of the final dimension of trauma that I think has finally been appreciated by our field is the timing of
Yeah.
trauma.
Okay.
Like, when does the trauma happen?
Mm.
And I think when we finally added that variable into the mix, we've really learned that early life experiences can have a really enduring long-term effect,
Sure.
especially when they're very severe and especially when they're repeated, but especially, maybe even bigger than that, when they happen in a context in which the child doesn't have any relational supports, either while the bad thing was happening or after the bad thing has passed. I mean, think about it. Even just when me and you have a bad day, what helps the most? Well, I mean, what helps to me is I can call one of my friends or family members and say, guess what? Like, not a thing went right today, right? And I'm
Yeah.
not looking for them to say, well, Erin, you should really schedule yourself better, right? Or, you should solve this problem differently. I'm not looking for that. I'm looking for somebody to say, man, I hear you,
Right.
right? I'm with you in that. I would be totally depleted if that was my day, right? And so when we think about just how helpful that is to get through kind of bad days that we might have, think about how absolutely crucial that is for bad traumatic things that
Yeah.
happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it keeps coming back to that relationship piece, right?
Hmm.
I mean, and
Hmm.
and and you can't way overgeneralize, but I mean, and basically you're talking about co-regulation, right? Isn't that
Absolutely. I love the term co-regulation because it's the idea that, especially when we're very young, we don't even know how to regulate
right?
without somebody else. We can't even regulate our own body temperature
Hmm.
without another warm body, a
Yeah.
really warm blanket. I mean, think about it. The first thing they do when a baby's born is if they're doing any testing, they're under a warmer. They get them next to their parent's skin as
Hmm.
quickly as they can, right? Because the body doesn't even know what temperature it's supposed to be at without some external feedback. And the co-regulation that we get when we're very young is a lot more physical in
Hmm.
nature. When we're older, it can still be physical in nature, a hug, right? That sort of thing. But I can even co-regulate with you over a webcam, right? I
Yeah.
can see your smile. I can see that you're being kind to me. It makes me feel welcome, right?
Sure.
When kids haven't had co-regulation when they're very, very young, their co-regulation needs when they're 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 still look like the co-regulation needs of a very young kid.
Right.
Okay. And so this is where trauma responsiveness kind of starts to butt heads with our very behaviorally oriented world, right?
Hmm.
Like this world that says kids should do as they're told, especially when they're this tall,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Kids need to listen to their parents, right? Kids should learn to do that by themselves, right? Because one day nobody will be around to do it for them. Well, all those independent skills are great if you're a kid who got all your co-regulation needs met early in life.
Yeah.
But for a kid whose co-regulation needs at 8 look a lot like their 3-year old. I mean, that can get really tricky for people because they'll say, well, I don't want to baby that kid. I don't want to let them get away with
Hmm.
things, And so to really get at, like, what do we mean when we say kids need relationships to heal? We also need to be able to appreciate just how different the relational needs are of trauma exposed kids than of
Right.
kids who didn't have a lot of trauma and had a lot of support.
Yeah. So even if you, let's say you had a, you know, I know you can't compare traumas, right? I know
Right.
that's not a thing. That's not a good thing. But like if you took a healthy 4-year old in a quote unquote normal family, and they went through a severe car wreck, and they were maybe in the hospital for a while and stuff like that, because of the relationship that they grew up in, they're going to be a lot more resilient to healing faster than a 6-month old who has never felt safe, felt seen, felt heard, been helped, had co-regulation and all the things.
Yeah, again, we don't like to compare traumas, but it's
Right.
absolutely true, right? Our time limited therapies that teach, kids skills about how to remember that even though something really bad happened, it's very unlikely to happen again, right?
Hmm.
And remember when that bad thing happened, did people come and help you? And the kid can be like, yeah, that's true, right?
Yeah.
And they
Right.
can kind of say, this bad thing that happened to me is unlikely to happen again. And sure, it did happen, but right, look at all these supports that I had, right? That can kind of help them frame that one bad thing within this
Hmm.
broader context of their life that's generally going okay. Now
Hmm.
that doesn't mean they won't have some nightmares, right? That
Sure.
doesn't mean they won't struggle in school for a while. That doesn't mean they don't need clinical support. They do. They
Yeah.
absolutely deserve that, right?
Hmm.
But the kids who I work with are the type of kids that if somebody were to come to me and say, you can give this kid 12 weeks of outpatient intervention and then we're not going to give you any more,
Hmm.
I might even say we could be at risk for doing more harm than
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Because what good is it for this kid to go get a new relationship for a very, very short amount of time
Mm.
just to then be told, right, well, that doesn't exist for you
Yeah.
either.
Right. Yeah.
And so I just like, sure, we can do healthy goodbyes and set the kid up to understand this is time limited and all that stuff. But for me, that's just too many gymnastics. I
Yeah.
mean, for the kids that I work with and that I care about, we've got to be willing to say, this kid might need supports throughout their entire lifespan.
Sure.
And it doesn't mean the supports aren't working.
Right.
It doesn't
Yeah.
mean the supports aren't giving them, quite frankly, some relief from the great suffering that they experience, right?
Right.
But it does mean that we need to have this kind of lifespan view on services that are available to
Mm.
kids who had this degree of bad stuff happen to them when they were very, very young.
Right. I was before I started this organization in 2017, and I worked full time until last June when I stepped away from my career to run this full time, and at the time the company that I worked for provided counseling. I came from trauma myself, and so I was thinking, man, I could really use some counseling. And so I talked to
Mhm.
the insurance people. They was like, well, yeah, you can have 6 sessions. And I was like, 6 sessions is yeah, never mind. You know,
Never
um,
mind.
and it wasn't until I found a Veterans Resource Center that the counseling was there, and it was I mean, I got a CPTSD, diagnosis and stuff, and I've been seeing somebody for over 2 years because, you know, that I don't know what you could get done in 6 weeks. I mean, but
Yeah. You might be able to plant some seeds, right? Like I'm never going to say right? I'm never going to say refuse help just because it's not long term enough,
yeah,
right?
right.
But my point here is that the kids that we're talking about are are not kids who can easily be reached by what I would call our like managed care
Mm,
mental health delivery system, right?
mhm.
Where, the insurance companies are kind of dictating, well, here's what we'll give you.
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
Well, that's not good enough for the kids that we're talking about. And we also, I think everybody's so results oriented in the short term.
Mm,
And, something that I talk with the teachers a lot about here at the children's place, they, work 4 or 5 hours a day with kids who have these histories that we're talking about.
mhm.
And they want to know if the kid is getting better. I mean, it is such a deep desire. Is this kid getting better? Is this kid getting better? And something we have to talk about is, they may still be showing some aggression, right? And it's hard to see that continue
Mm,
to crop up.
yeah,
It's hard to see that you've been working with them for 6 months and they still come in and some days don't trust you. They won't take any of your comfort, right? And it's like,
yeah,
well, my comfort last week, what's going on with this week? It can be so frustrating. The outcomes that we're focused on might not come to fruition for years,
yeah.
you know? And we know that they will through our longitudinal research, right? But
Mm,
within the day-to-day work, it's a real keeping the faith type of work. Because the other thing we haven't talked about that makes, like, it sounds like, oh, relationships, great, give kids relationships. Well, kids who haven't been able to trust people aren't real quick to trust people.
No,
And,
they are
and
not.
quite frankly, the nicer you are and the more regulated you are and the more on a schedule you are, the more this kid's like, yeah, something bad's going to happen.
Right.
Okay. Like, adults don't do this. Right.
Right.
And something bad always happens. Adults always do something bad. Right. And so sometimes kids can resist the most the very relationships that are the best for them. And that's a long-term game,
Yeah.
right? You got to stick with a kid who thinks like that for a long time
Right.
before you can expect to start seeing the fruits of that labor.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't want to go to, I feel like we could sit here and talk for the next 3 hours.
Yeah,
However, I know
probably.
that we can't. So, practical takeaways for parents and caregivers, foster adoptive families, whatever it is. You kind of told me, number one, do your own work, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I say all the time, I mean, I feel like I overuse this line in my work. The the greatest tool that you have when working with a trauma exposed child is your own regulation.
Yeah.
Your own ability to be real with yourself about where your stress level is, about the tone of voice you're using, about the how much tension you have in your
Sure.
body at a
Yeah.
given time. And that is not easy, especially because people who like to do this work are do-gooder type people, and they're often taking on a lot of this work.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's about less is more. You got to
Right.
let go of some things to really be present for this
Mm.
kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and in my experience, a lot of the families that are currently like fostering or adopting or have, it's because they themselves, I mean, that's me,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so they themselves have been there, and so they want to, they want to help these kiddos, but you've got to heal yourself too. You got to be working on yourself. You need to be, if you're not in counseling, you probably should be in counseling and those kinds of things.
Yeah. And, the work itself can be healing, but I think only for people who recognize what you just said, that part of jumping in and helping the problem that I know was so impactful for me is saying, well, how did it impact me? And how can I keep the ways that it affected me from getting in the way of this good work that I want to do?
Mm.
And we talk all the time with developing therapists, right? People who say, I want to be a therapist. What are the areas that you can't do? And what are the areas that you can do? Because we all have certain types of relational work that will always be a place that maybe we shouldn't go.
Mm.
And that's not a bad thing. In fact, I would say you are doing the work when you realize what your limits and your boundaries are. And that doesn't mean you can't help by finding a different context for that kid,
Mm.
right? But that's really a big piece of it. I also think when I think about advice for parents and caregivers is keeping that long-term focus.
Mm.
Even the child feeling safe enough to misbehave in front of you, right? Misbehave is an opportunity for you to teach them when you do something that maybe you weren't supposed to do, I'm going to react differently
Right.
than other people have.
Yeah.
Right? I'm still going to
Absolutely.
love you.
Yeah.
I'm going to react consistently. You're going to get the same consequence, right? And the consequence doesn't have to be negative. The consequence could just be a nod and the pat on the back of like, I see you're having a hard time, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's really big. And I think, also we talk about the child's relational health. People cannot do this work without an army of their own relational
Right.
health
Absolutely.
around them.
Yeah. We talk about this on I say this a lot, and there's kind of three reasons I started this podcast. And the first is there's a ton of resources out there for foster and adoptive families that they aren't aware of. And so that's the number
Mm,
one thing. And the number two thing is, we share burdens, right? I say it, we do better in community. All of us do better in community, and we connect well with people that are more similar to us. And so every, 1 week I'll have somebody on that has a resource. The next week I have somebody on that's the first foster and adopted family and stuff like that, because we need that shared, even though it may only come through the speaker. If we have that sense of community and connection with others that are running the race, we do better.
yeah, I mean, there's the hope. There's we build, people talk about self-efficacy, right? Like this idea that I can overcome, I can make an impact. I think community efficacy is even more important to
Sure.
that. Like,
Yeah.
what can we overcome as a community?
Yeah.
And I think, one reason also why I like to say, hey, therapy's great, but we got to create therapeutic spaces outside of therapy for kids,
Mm,
is because the therapeutic spaces outside of the therapy room are community embedded.
mm,
And when a community starts to learn, we can support each other to support these kids. The hope is just so strong.
yeah.
And it's the hope that keeps us going, right? It's the
Absolutely.
belief in something bigger than ourselves, right? Like maybe we're not seeing a lot of change, positive change day to day in our kid, but somebody else is, or somebody else has this story about a kid they worked with 10 years ago who's now employed, and they've
Yeah.
been employed for 5 years, right?
Right.
Like, wow, okay. I'm going to keep putting
Awesome.
drops in this bucket then.
Yeah, absolutely. We're running low. So we talked about do your own work, focus on self-regulation. You kind of talked about that. So being
Mhm.
aware of where I'm at, and maybe I need to take a break and take a step and back up, and kind of, if you got a spouse, tag team it or whatever, so that I can go and regulate to
Mhm.
stay regulated as long as possible. Because if you're
Mhm.
not regulated yourself, you can't connect and provide any co-regulation if you're not regulated yourself, right?
Yeah, and the other thing I like about those moments, those breaks we might take to self-regulate, it also gives the kid, it not only models for the kid good coping,
Okay.
but it also gives the kid some time to self-regulate and pull themselves out of that fight flight mode a little
Mm,
bit.
yeah.
I think some people are like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do when something's gone wrong with a kid? And we forget that sometimes the doing is in not doing. It's
Mm,
in not being reactive. It's in not being too close, that we're crowding the kid and their ability to kind of take that deep breath, right?
mm,
And presence is important and helpful, but that doesn't mean we need to be hugging a really distressed kid, because I don't know, I don't love to be hugged when I'm really distressed, right? I'm
right.
kind of in leave me alone mode.
Yeah.
But I might not mind if somebody's across the room silently being a witness to what I'm experiencing, right? And so that self regulation break, I think, also gets us out of that do, teach, 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 nurture, nurture, nurture mode that can actually amp the kid up a little bit when they're
Mm,
already feeling a little off. And so I like that self regulation has that dual purpose.
yeah. I do. That's good. Connect before you correct. You talked about how we've talked, relationship is so important. And so if you don't have that relationship, you have nothing to stand on to provide any correction, right?
Right. I mean, a kid is not going to respect what you're telling them if they don't trust you,
Yeah.
right? They're really not even going to listen. And honestly, what I typically find is once the connection's in place, a whole lot less correction is even needed.
Mm,
Okay? Because the other thing we say all the time is kids do as well as they can. And I think when we find ourselves constantly, don't do that, that's not safe, try this other thing, try that other thing, we're kind of letting learning and directives get in the way of being together.
mm,
And so when we focus on being together, building trust, everybody taking space to be as calm and collected as they can be, what we end up with is a kid who kind of just knows how to do that.
Mm.
And then you'll start to see when you give space, when you show them that you're connected and still with them, they'll often self-correct before we even have to get around to you should have done this or that,
Right.
right? And we can
Yeah.
even go back to them later, depending on how old they are sometimes, and say, hey, you remember that happened yesterday? Wonder what would have worked better. And they're spot on
Yeah.
with what should have worked better, right? Because it's
Sure.
not that they don't get it. It's not that they don't understand. It's that they can't in that moment.
Not in the moment, right? When you
Yeah.
when you are all up or all shut down, when you're all
Right.
activated or all shut down, you
Yeah.
can't do anything different. So,
Yeah.
learn the skill of curiosity. Robin Goebel, which I've talked about on the podcast before, she talks about being curious a lot. Kind of hit on that before we have to wrap up.
Yeah. So I love curiosity from the angle of caregivers and from the angle of children. I mean, again, kids do as well as they can. So if they're not doing very well, we got to be thinking about why. What's going on? It's
Mm,
not because they're a bad kid. It's
right.
not. We know that, but it doesn't feel that way in the moment where we're like,
Yeah.
we've talked about this 800 times. Why are they doing it again? And so I think when we come from this perspective of all behavior is communication, we need to be saying not why is this kid misbehaving, but what's going on in the environment that's getting the kid to this place of dysregulation. Is it
Mm,
the lights? Do we not have enough natural light? Have we not spent enough time in nature? Have we not slept enough? Are we hungry? Right? Like what's going on? Because we know this kid would do well if they could, right?
mm,
So we need to be curious about what's going on with us and the environment. And when we do that, we also teach curiosity in the child. And if you
mm,
think about it, being curious about your own world is actually a pretty brave thing
yeah.
because it means that you're open to the unknown.
Mm,
Kids who've experienced trauma, all they want is control back.
right.
And curiosity goes away really rapidly in the trauma exposed child. They don't want to be curious. They want to just assume there's going to be a bad outcome here.
Yeah.
When we learn curiosity for ourselves and model it for kids, what we see is they also start to get that curiosity about the world back.
Mm,
And when they start to have that curiosity, they might try out something relationally with you. They might smile at you for the first time,
mm,
right? And then they might
right.
realize, I got a pretty cool outcome out of that smile. And so, curiosity is actually something when we start to see it show up in a child, we know that the child is kind of verging toward a track of readiness to learn and grow.
Mm. Love it. So staying curious about the kiddos and where they're at and why it's you could do this yesterday. Why can't you do this math problem today? You did it yesterday, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, maybe something's going on, right? Staying curious. So,
Yeah.
oh man, I could sit here and talk all day. What are some ways that they can follow your work? Where do they find you? Where do they learn about your
Yeah,
work?
that's a good question. I could do a little better about having a good web presence, but I know if you Google Erin Hambrick and Lab Panda for
Hmm.
pediatric abuse, neglect, disaster, and adversity, all of the research work that I've done over the years, you can access links to articles that I've written, different media events that I've taken part in. I'm also on LinkedIn, so
Mm,
you can look at Erin Hambrick on LinkedIn. I post a lot of information there. Whenever I'm actually working on a personal website to kind of, now that I'm out on my own as an
hmm.
independent contractor. And so I'll get you the URL to that
Yeah,
when it comes out. But those are great places to start. I'm always looking to hear from folks, to hear what they're experiencing, what they've tried, what's worked, what hasn't worked. We only can move this work forward when we know more about the unique experiences of children and families. And so definitely encourage people to tune in, to reach out, teach us what you're learning. We
yeah.
need to hear from children and families about what works and what doesn't.
Do you have and I don't know that this is even possible, but is there a metric of success? Like, is it, there's somewhere I heard 30% of, if you're present 30% of the time, your kiddos are gonna do well, or something like that.
Yeah.
Is there well, how do we provide people hope that it's in
Yeah.
all
That it's
likelihood
enough,
it's
right?
going to get better?
What I tell people is that 1 literal minute of no phone, of no looking away, of no mental distraction for a kid is equivalent to 60 to 90 minutes of the distracted chaos, and you're just in the room with
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Okay. So think about if you can do 5 minutes like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
That's better than 3 or 4 or 5 hours of just that distracted chaos. And
Yeah.
so I tell people start there.
Mm,
You start with the 5 minutes a day where you set your own timer if you need
mm,
to.
yeah.
But you don't think anything other than how do I be with this child? How do I imitate them? How do I describe what they're doing? How do I just focus on them and my own regulation? And when you start there with those 5 minutes a day, what you'll find is those 5 minutes easily become 6, 7, 8, 9 because the child tolerates that better and
Yeah.
starts to feel safer and safer. And then you start to find that more parts of your day are more easily therapeutic.
Mm,
And so you start with that 5 minutes, and I think the sky's the limit. And then you remind yourself at the end of the day that if you got those 5 minutes, you did your good work,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
What we need is caregivers not burning out. We need them to go to bed at night knowing when they've succeeded. And you have put a big drop in the bucket if you've done just that.
Yeah. Yeah. That between the national study that I found was that between half and 2/3 of foster families quit within the first year, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and because they don't feel supported, they're exhausted, they're worn out, they don't know,
Yeah.
you go through the foster licensing process, and I've been doing this a long time, 11, 12 years, and I am still constantly learning. And so you don't spend 3 months going for 3 or 4 hours once a week, and at the end of it get get a degree and know what there is to know. And so they're just exhausted, they are worn out mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, everything. And so
Yeah.
they just wear out. And so yeah, taking that time and being part of that community, and being and learning more and things like that is just going to help be
Yeah,
more
and
successful.
doing less. You don't
Yeah.
have to get 5 foster kids in your home to start off, right?
Right. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, I say that because that's how I am. I'm like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it all the way, right? Like I
Yeah.
play a lot of tennis. I recently had some family stuff happen, needed to take some time off, went straight back into it, and my hamstring's not doing real well, right? Like we have to think like that when we think about the caregiving that we're taking on.
Yeah,
We've got to start small before we can expand for a greater impact.
for sure. Well, Dr. Hambrick, thank you so much for coming on. I know you're short on time. Um,
Yes.
Really appreciate the work that you are doing, and just the amount of research and things that you're putting in. Like you said, we can never, I don't think we're ever going to get to where we know all that there is to know, and there's nothing else and we just need to put it all into practice. I don't think that day is ever going to come. So
No, that day's never going to come. And I talk with my sisters about this a lot. We always say you just got to live those questions, live them the best you can,
yeah,
because you might find that the living of them leads you into the answers of what's going to work for these kids. So
yeah,
staying curious, I think, back to that
absolutely.
theme.
To stay curious. Hannah, thank you so much for putting the two of us together, and for the 5-part series we did on trauma, replaying it. Guys, if you haven't heard it, the 5th episode played last week. It is really good, if I do say myself. I mean, I think Hannah and I did a pretty good job. And so thanks again for going through that whole process with me, and doing the recording and putting this together. And guys, next week we're going to have, I'm super excited about this. There's a guy named Peter Mutazabi, and he is huge on social media. The foster dad flipper. So he's gonna be on next week. Have you guys heard of this guy? Have you seen him on Instagram and Facebook and
No,
stuff?
but I gotta tune in.
Yeah, you got to check this guy out. He's got like 2 million followers. He's actually from, I think maybe Zimbabwe, and he's a single dad. He moved here. I don't know when he moved here, but he fosters, and he's just out there. So he's going to be on next week, and so check it out. This episode will post. I don't know. I'll have to send you the dates, but anyways, so next week be foster dad flipper. Thank you, Dr. Hambrick, so much for coming on.
Thank you all for having me. I learn
Absolutely.
a lot from talking with you all.
That's great. Hannah, thanks again so much for coming on as well again. And we'll catch you guys next week, okay?
Sounds great.
Thank
Bye.
y'all. Bye.
See you.